That's right, it's your boy. Today, we are creating the ultimate Fungal Knight build in Baldur's Gate 3. Another long-awaited build that may seem quite similar to the Death Knight on the surface, but is actually vastly different underneath. The Fungal Knight is one of my personal favorites and comes with a versatile and ever-changing playstyle. While not as malevolent as our previous Death Knights, you have very strong melee, casting, and even healing and face capability, while simultaneously having a bunch of mushrooms fight for you. Truly the build of all time, as it can do it all with little effort. You also get something new with every level, unlike a lot of builds, so that's super fun as well when you're playing through the game. For those of you that just want a reference to the general build path, consider subscribing before you click off, as this build will be 2 Oath of Ancients Paladin and 10 Spore Druid. There also exists in written format a complete detailed overview of the entire build and gear throughout Act 1, 2, and 3 available over on the Patreon. Link in the description, and more on that at the end of the video. Welcome to Purge Evil. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get into it. Character creation in level 1. You can take any race, but I particularly like Drow for flavor, and with that we introduce our model for the video. Being from the Underdark, Minthara had developed a relationship with the Myconids, repledging her oath to that of the Ancients and learning the ways of the fungi. Like the Death Knight, you can play a Paladin up to level 7, then respec into this build to further roleplay into the Fungal Knight theme, but my recommendation would be to use this build on a new character, as it's really cool to see how the build changes and develops over the course of the game, starting as mainly a melee fighter with some casting, and later transitioning into a full-on caster with her army at the forefront. Now, I said I like to use Drow, but I'm not going to recommend a specific race. The same goes for background and skills, as it truly is a personal preference for this build. Moving on to stats, we will set our strength to 10 and our dexterity at 14. Your attacks might feel a bit weak until you get off the Nautiloid, and that's just fine because at level 2 we will unlock Shillelagh, but more on that in just a moment. For now, make sure to grab a quarterstaff from one of the corpses on the ship. Constitution at 13, because later we will add Resilience Constitution to bump that to 14. Intelligence at 8 because we don't need it. Wisdom at 16, and you can set this at 17 if you plan on using the Hag's Hair with this build, but for this video and the purposes of this video, we will set our Wisdom to 16, and then for your Charisma, put that at 14. From our Oath, we also unlock Healing Radiance, which actually is a pretty decent healing ability. However, healing for this build is going to be more of a symbiotic relationship. We're going to be healing for the main purposes of buffing and healing ourselves. That shall be explained through gear. Level 2. Now at level 2, we quickly multi-class into Druid so we can really begin this build. Take Shillelagh and Poison Spray for your cantrips. Poison Spray is obviously of great flavor and does become pretty powerful later in the game, but the star of the show here is of course Shillelagh. This cantrip is the reason we are able to have such low strength, as when you cast this while wielding a club or staff, the weapon becomes imbued, deals more damage, and uses your spell casting ability modifier for attack rolls, which will be Wisdom for this build. So essentially works like Pact of the Blade for warlocks and their charisma. Always make sure to have this active when you go into a fight. For our main spell here, we will take Entangle, which does exactly what you might expect and conjures vines to catch anyone in the area and prevents them from moving. It also debuffs them with disadvantage on their attack rolls and dex saves, so this is a very useful ability, especially in the early game. Next, we will take Healing Word, as for one, it's always nice to have someone that can do ranged healing, but as I stated before, we are going to be using healing to not only support the team, but truly to buff ourselves. For the last two, I like to take Long Strida, which is an S tier spell giving you a bonus 3 meters of movement speed, and Speak with Animals because we're connected to nature, man. Alternatively, you can take Thunder Wave, but we'll take that in a couple levels anyways. Level 3. Moving on to level 3, we will dip back into Paladin to unlock our Smites. Make sure you have these checked in your reactions menu so you'll actually be able to use them. For your fighting style, take Great Weapon Fighting. This will ensure we get a free reroll of our attack dice if we roll a 1 or 2 while two-handing our staff. Consider a respec later in the game to swap this with Defense, which will give us a +1 bonus to AC, which will be better to have have for the endgame, as we won't need to use melee as much there. Thunderous Smite is the only smite we will prepare, as it allows us to prone an enemy, which gives anyone on the team advantage on them and allows for big damage of course. And for our other 3 spells, I like to prepare Bless, Divine Favor, and Cure Wounds. Level 4. At level 4, we will move back over to Druid and continue there for the remainder of the build. Here at Druid 2, we get our Wild Shapes, which we can basically ignore for this build, but we will also unlock our subclass, which will of course be Circle of the Spores. With this, we get Bone Chill for a cantrip, and we also gain 2 Spore Druid abilities. Halo of Spores is a reaction, but it can be used like an action during your turn and uses that turn's reaction instead of an action or bonus action. That was a lot of action. This deals 1d4 necrotic damage to start and will do more damage later in the game, bumping up to 1d6 and 1d8. Halo of Spores also deals double damage whenever you have Symbiotic Entity active, which is the main ability we get, and you should aim to keep it active at all times. Symbiotic Entity uses a wild shape charge and essentially is its own wild shape for the Fungal Knight. This will grant you 4 temporary HP per Druid level, which becomes massive by the end of the build. Your attacks also deal a bonus 1d6 necrotic damage stacked on top of Shillelagh. This makes the Fungal Knight absolutely a deadly weapon at level 4. For the prepared spell, as mentioned before, take Thunder Wave, level 5. Moving on to level 5, we get 2 always prepared spells with Blindness and Detect Thoughts, which is actually a ritual. Blindness is particularly useful because, as the name suggests, you can blind enemies and even upcast to blind multiple. It also doesn't require concentration, which is a huge plus. For the prepared spell, Spike Growth is the only correct option here. This spell can be used for the entire game and can basically just tear enemies apart, or rather cause enemies to tear themselves apart. This creates a 6-meter area of spikes, which of course is difficult terrain like the vines we've been using, but the spikes also have movement speed and cause creatures within to take 2d4 piercing damage for every 1.5 meters of movement they make, which is absolutely disgusting by the Fungal Knight. Make good use of this. Level 6. Next at Druid 4, we have our first feat and several unlocks. First, we have 2 choices for the feat. This will be up to you and your playstyle. If you enjoy the concentration spells and want more out of them, or are having trouble maintaining concentration itself, go ahead and take Resilience Constitution, which gives you proficiency in Constitution saving throws and allows the Fungal Knight to raise her Constitution to 14, granting yet another point for saving throws. Otherwise, simply take Ability Improvement to increase your Wisdom by 2. We get Deep Wrath as a wild shape or Wrath, whatever, which we can once again basically ignore, and for our cantrip, we will of course take Thorn Whip. This is useful for repositioning enemies into your spikes and vines, or even just to bring them closer to the Fungal Knight for a not so pleasant time. Aside from pulling the creature towards you, Thorn Whip also deals 2d6 piercing damage by this point in the game and will upgrade to 3d6 piercing damage at level 10. For the prepared spell, I actually ended up taking Gust of Wind. This can reposition enemies as well onto your surfaces, but it can also knock enemies off balance, as well as clear the area of things like Fog or Cloud Kill. Level 7. Moving on to level 7 Druid 5, we get Wild Strike, which is an extra attack for wild shapes, 2 always prepared spells, and level 3 spells to prepare. Here, we get Animate Dead always prepared, so the Fungal Knight can begin to raise undead minions. Keep in mind that you will be able to upcast this to raise 3 instead of 1. Next, we have Gaseous Form always prepared, which essentially turns you into a cloud of mist and allows you to travel through tiny places and avoid most damage. A neat little ability, and for our prepared spells, we of course first have to take one of my favorite spells just cause it's cool and I like it and it's badass, that being Call Lightning. This deals a whopping 3d10 lightning damage and also holds concentration, allowing you to recast it each turn without expending a spell slot. A truly powerful spell when combined with water, but really just a fun one and not too much build flavor, admittedly. Conversely, for our second prepared spell here, we will take Plant Growth, which is absolutely one of the best surface spells in the game, as it not only quarters creatures' movement speed, which is 25%, it doesn't require concentration at all, and it will last for 10 turns. It can be burned away by fire, however, so keep that in mind. An absolutely disgusting combo by the Fungal Knight. Level 8. Here we are at Druid 6, where we will finally become the leader of the mushrooms. This is where we finally unlock our shroom buddies with Fungal Infestation. We get 4 charges of this, and instead of raising an undead, it raises the infamous Fungal Zombie. This applies Crawling Gnaw just like regular zombies, raising more from enemies you kill, but the huge perk of the Fungal Zombies is that they're created with Fungal Infestation charges rather than spell slot. You also get a couple wild shapes that I won't go into, and for our prepared spell, I like to take Lesser Restoration because you can never be too prepared. Level 9. Moving on to level 9 Druid 7, we unlock some very powerful spells to use. First, we gain Blight as an always prepared spell, and is one of the strongest spells in the entire game, especially when combined with the Staff of Cherished Necromancy, which allows for unlimited casting of necromancy spells. More on that in the gear section. Blight deals 8d8 necrotic damage, which is just absolutely massive. Next, we have Confusion, which is another very strong spell that essentially incapacitates a group of creatures for 3 turns and can be upcasted for a larger AoE. This is one you can just have fun with, and can even save your life if you find yourself surrounded in honor mode. The Mushroom Knight is not only a being of decay and rot, but one of nature itself, able to summon beings of the elements to fight alongside her. For our prepared spell here, we will of course take Conjure Woodland Being. This conjures a Dryad, which can use Entangle and also has an ability called Nature Step, which enables your entire party to ignore the effects of the difficult terrain that you place, tremendously boosting the viability of your surface spells. The Dryad also has a summon of itself with the Wood Woad, which can also use Entangle and is a nice tanky ally to have, especially for next to no cost. At this point in the game, the Fungal Knight has gone from a full melee and support role to the leader of an entire army of mushrooms, and now beings of the elements, of which we will have even more at level 10. Here we have Druid 8, which means our second feat. We also get a level 5 spell slot to upcast with. For the feat, take what you didn't get last time, in other words, Resilience Constitution if you already took Ability Improvement, and vice versa. For our prepared spell, continuing to build our army, we of course have to take Conjure Minor Elemental, with which we can conjure a Fire Elemental or Ice or Mud methods. Level 11. Quickly moving on to level 11 Druid 9, we unlock level 5 spells and 2 more always prepared spells. First, we have the devastating Cloud Kill, which initially deals 5d8 poison damage and creates an area of itself that deals the same amount of damage every turn to creatures stuck inside. Another nice feature of this is that we are able to move the cloud every turn so long as we maintain concentration, effectively preventing enemies from escaping. The next always prepared spell is Contagion. This is an interesting spell and doesn't seem to get talked about too much, as it is a bit difficult to properly execute. I won't go into the various diseases it can inflict, but there are 6 different diseases, and to actually give one of these diseases to an enemy, a minimum of 3 turns will have to pass. On each of these turns, the target will make a Constitution save. If it saves 3 times, the disease is not inflicted and the target is fine. On the other hand, if it fails the save 3 times, it will then contract the disease that you selected. While all of this is going on, the target has disadvantage on attack rolls and checks due to being poisoned. Anything that debuffs the target's constitution is going to help tremendously with this spell to succeed. Contagion does not require concentration, so it can be fun to play around with, especially being that we are the disgusting Fungal Knight. For our prepared spell, we have to take Insect Plague, another devastating area spell, but this one deals 4d10 piercing damage to everyone caught within, so it essentially acts as an upgraded version of Spike Growth. Level 12. Arriving at the final level of the build, we unlock a level 6 spell slot for upcasting, another Wild Shape and Strike, a cantrip, our final prepared spell, and our final Spore ability. That was a mouthful. That's what she said. Spreading Spores is yet another area ability, but this one uses a bonus action and does not require concentration, making it something you're able to freely cast every turn if you desire. This creates a humble 3-meter area of spores that deal 2d8 necrotic damage per turn and does not harm your allies whatsoever, making this seriously one of the best abilities in the game outright, especially being a bonus action. You can take any cantrip, and for our final prepared spell, you know we of course have to take Conjure Elemental. With this, you can simply summon one of 4 elementals, that being air, earth, fire, or water, all with their own unique abilities. This can also be upcasted to level 6 to transform the elementals into Myrmidons, which are a bit more powerful and come with even better abilities. With that, the Fungal Knight is not only the leader of an army of undead and mushrooms, she also holds domain over nature itself, bolstering her army with powerful beings of the elements. At this point, you'll rarely ever need to come within melee distance of an enemy, because how the fuck would they even make it to you? Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves, we have to know how to dress. Gear. We now arrive in the gear section, and I will go over the major gear for the build. If you'd like a detailed overview of every recommended piece of gear through every act, the written version of this build is available over on the Patreon, but more on that in just a few moments. The build defining piece of gear for the Fungal Knight will of course be Armor of the Spore Keeper. As the name suggests, this is specifically designed for the Spore Druid, giving you a +1 bonus to spell save DC and an extra point of necro damage whenever you deal it. But the biggest perk of this armor is that it grants the Fungal Knight the ability to spread 3 different types of spores while Symbiotic Entity is active. These are Bibberbang, Timisk, and Haste spores, each with their own effects, and Haste being haste of course. This is a must-have for any Spore Druid build and is located in Philgrave's mansion in Baldur's Gate until you get this, just wear the best heavy armor that you have. The Helm of Baldur is going to be the final headgear that I recommend in the game, but until that, you'll want to wear Wapira's crown for essentially the entire game up to that point. This is a reward for saving the Tiefling refugees and simply heals the Fungal Knight 1d6 HP whenever she heals an ally, which synergizes particularly well with our main amulet up until Act 3, which will of course be Brood Mother's Revenge. This is also acquired from the Druid Grove and buffs the Fungal Knight's weapon with 1d6 poison damage whenever she is healed. Very flavorful, and we will swap this out with the Greater Health Amulet in Act 3 later in the game. Disintegrating Nightwalkers is good for basically any build, but another option in Act 1 is to buy the Boots of Genial Striding from the Myconid Colony. These are super nice in the early game when we're more of a melee character, as it causes difficult terrain to no longer affect our movement speed. Later on, you can replace these with the Boots of Persistence, which grants you permanent long strider and freedom of movement. Alternatively, to get around difficult terrain, we can acquire the Ring of Free Action in Act 2, which completely ignores difficult terrain and makes you immune to paralyzed and restrained. Another good ring to wear for this build, especially early on, is the Ring of Elemental Infusion found at the Githyanki Creche. Whenever you deal elemental damage from a spell or cantrip, you infuse your weapon with that element for 1d4 damage until the end of your next turn for 1 successful hit. For gloves, Hellrider's Pride are particularly useful as we will be using healing to buff ourselves. This pair of gloves increases your strength saving throws by 1, but also grants Blade Ward to whoever you heal, effectively giving them resistance to most weapon attacks. These are from Zevlor in Act 1, but in Act 2, I particularly like the Poisoner's Gloves, which whenever you deal poison damage, which is most of our melee attacks at this point, the target has to make a Constitution saving throw or become poisoned. Another beautifully flavorful piece of equipment. Once you switch over from being melee to being more caster, I recommend equipping any shield that boosts your initiative. This goes for ranged weapons as well. Now, this build will utilize staves and clubs for the entire game, and there's quite a few I'd recommend, so I'll just go over a couple major ones here. There are many staves to choose from throughout the game, but the primary staff of our final build will of course be the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. If you've used this before or seen my Necromancer Death Knight build, you already know how absolutely busted this is. This has a +2 enchantment and deals an extra 1d4 necrotic damage on hit, but it comes with an insane ability called Life Essence that activates after you kill a creature with a necromancy spell. You will then have a toggleable passive that doesn't go away, that allows you essentially to cast necromancy spells freely without expending spell slots. The crazy part is that this was patched in during patch 4, so it's not even a bug. If this ever changes, I'll make note in the comments, but this is absolutely the pinnacle weapon to have for this build. I would also like to mention in Act 1 the Nature's Snare and Pale Oak Clubs, which are especially useful early on for the Fungal Knight. Nature's Snare simply gives you a chance to ensnare your target on a hit if it's not a plant or beast, and the Pale Oak makes you immune to the vines you conjure and gives you Faith Warden's Vines, which essentially is a free use of the Entangle spell once per long rest. And of course, last but not least, course, we have to give an honorable mention to Marco Heshkir, truly one of the gear of all time for many builds, just like Disintegrating Nightwalkers. This is one of my personal favorite builds that I've actually played around with for several months, so if you enjoyed the build or have anything to add to improve the build, definitely let me know down in the comments. If you found this video helpful in any way and want to see more, make sure to subscribe so as to not to miss out on any future builds or content like the lore series I have cooking up. As mentioned earlier, all of my builds plus a bunch more are available on the Purge Evil Patreon, where you'll find a complete detailed overview in written format of this build as well as others for Baldur's Gate 3 and in the future other games as well as guides. When you become a Slayer, you get access to these builds of course, along with shoutouts, early access to videos, and exclusive content. I have much more planned in the future as the channel grows, where you'll have access to the Purge Evil Discord, whitelisted servers, and even discounted and free merchandise. This is only some of what I have planned as we eventually turn Purge Evil into a community, so if you're interested in anything like that or just want to show some love and support the channel, there is a link in the description for you to check it out for yourself. And I want to take this moment to give a special thanks to my current patrons who by now, in just over a week of launching the Patreon when I'm writing this, have already supported enough for me to be able to afford the full Adobe suite, which is the software I use to create these videos. I've only been using Adobe Premiere, but now I'll be able to use things like After Effects and even actual Photoshop, so once I learn a bit, I'll be able to make these videos even better thanks to you all. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It is such a blessing to have your support, and I truly thank you. And if you, the viewer, have made it to this point, I just want to say thank you for stopping by, and until next time, Purge Evil.
Oh, yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah.